today. Charlie Hebdo, freedom of speech, and why Western countries don't have it. Your host is Rick Falkvinger, and this is Liberties Report.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Good evening and welcome to Liberties Report Week 2, 2015. This week has unsurprisingly focused on freedom of speech following the terrorist attack on the Charlie Hebdo offices in Paris, France. And more or less everybody gets freedom of speech completely wrong in the following debate. First, freedom of speech is not there to protect mainstream statements. It is specifically intended to not just allow distasteful and incorrect statements, but protect people's right to make them. Charlie Hebdo was a deliberately provocative and contrarian paper, always going against the mainstream, always daring to break the comfort of the consensus. So, when everybody and their brother is raising signs saying, "I am Charlie, Charlie," they are vividly demonstrating that they are seeking refuge and comfort in the mainstream and therefore anything but the spirit of Charlie Hebdo. One cartoonist of Charlie Hebdo, Bernard Altrop, using the pen name Willem, is speaking rather outright on this phenomenon, saying, quote, "We vomit on these people who suddenly say they are our friends," end quote. And that's an example of staying true to your spirit and to your compass, and specifically not seeking refuge in any kind of comfort of the masses. This so-called outpouring of support for freedom of speech becomes absurd beyond satire in its hypocrisy when politicians who have fought to repress freedom of speech are marching in support of it. The Foreign Minister of Egypt was marching for freedom of speech at the very same time as a young man was sentenced to 3 years in jail for privately stating on Facebook that he did not believe in a God. The hypocrisy here is beyond repulsive and beyond satire. At the same time, you have columnists from every corner of the globe demonstrating their utter lack of understanding of what freedom of speech is. There have been hundreds of columns and op-eds posted by now that boil down to the statement, "Every statement must be unquestionably permitted by law as long as it is permitted by law." That is not freedom of speech. That is the exact opposite of freedom of speech. To help illustrate the concept, the very simple concept, let's take a look at this flat chart with 3 cases, as originally drawn by Emil Marklund. The first case is where somebody makes a statement or of an opinion or an artistic expression. And as we follow the flowchart lines, we see that in this case, doing so does not constitute a crime. In this case, the first of 3, you therefore have freedom of speech. The second and third cases are where, again, somebody makes a statement or an artistic expression. But this time we follow the flowchart line to question whether the statement is good and respectful. In this case, if the answer is yes, the statement is uncompromisingly legal. If the answer is no, however, the statement or expression may be illegal as determined by prosecution at a court. This leads us to the conclusion that in both these cases 2 and 3, you do not, repeat, not have freedom of speech. There is no grey area here. You cannot have some freedom of speech just as you can't be somewhat pregnant. It is not freedom of speech if you are free to say anything unoffensive. It just doesn't work like that. It is not the outcome of the legal test that determines whether you have freedom of speech or not. It is the existence of such a legal test in the first place that determines whether you have freedom of speech or not, entirely regardless of which criteria or how narrow criteria that test uses. If stating an opinion or making an artistic expression can get you convicted, even under a remote hypothetical set of circumstances, then you do not have freedom of speech. It should also be noted that none of the Western aspiring democracies meet this very simple bar. Not one. Therefore, it's shockingly hypocritical and absurd when politicians, columnists, and regime-defending media alike claim to be defending freedom of speech, and in every statement doing so, inserting that reservation of a legal test for allowed expressions that they are defending. It demonstrates they haven't understood the very first paragraph of the subject they claim to defend. And the same politicians who claim to be defending freedom of speech wasted no time in adding more surveillance of private correspondence, ideas, and communications, which also goes completely counter to freedom of speech. This is beyond depressing. It's appalling, frankly. The interior ministers of 12 EU countries said in a joint statement this Sunday that to combat events like Charlie Hebdo, more censorship is needed. Yes, you did hear that right. They are using murders at a freedom of speech institution to justify censorship. It's disgusting and it's appalling. Your freedom of speech is safeguarded and defended by the same people who limit your access to crucial information about how they are performing on the job you are paying for. I'm Rick Falkvinger and this is Liberties Report. Visit our sponsor, Private Internet Access. Good night.
This report is presented by Private Internet Access.
Liberties Report is produced using exclusively free software.